Hi everyone. This is an overview and summary of Chapter 7, Critical Inquiry, Contemporary Critics and Contemporary Critique. This is presented by Lena Heim, Jared High, and Maggie Roth. So the beginning of the chapter starts off with an overview and a link to Chapter 6. It talks about Habermas's judgment on Adorno, and they believe that Adorno's logic is based on being impulsive and also a lack of critical awareness. Adorno's rejection of Bergson's process talks about Bergson's ideology. He believes that he requires some type of rationale and that it's somehow different from Adorno's romantic irrationalism. Wiggershauss links Adorno's relationship to reality with subject perception, which sort of links in to some of the critique of Habermas's work and the communicative reason. So Horkheimer, who was known as a radical anti-capitalist, believed there to be a trend of violence in Habermas's work. However, others had said that Habermas was said to stand behind the idea of using words, using vocabulary to create change versus using weapons or any type of violent action to create change. Habermas wanted to create a new foundation beyond Marxian theory, which was relatively new, as Horkheimer and Adorno kind of stood behind Marxian theory quite strongly. Horkheimer and Adorno kind of played off of each other, so Horkheimer was very hostile. He actually rejected or helped to reject a lot of Habermas's theses and his research and his work. And Adorno was almost seen as the weakness because he very cautiously said that he did not reject his work and also said that he did not necessarily stand behind it. They did have a similar outlook and a similar position on the work of Habermas. Habermas had two ways of reason. Both of these involved using subject-centered reasoning. And his whole point was to try to supplement Marx's work. He felt that Marx's work needed to be modernized and updated, and that the work that he did was a foundation, but it needed to be expanded on. One of the main things that Habermas definitely came forth and believed in was finding ways to have greater human freedom. He was definitely more liberal in that sense when compared to Horkheimer and Adorno. So then it goes into Paulo Freire, and it talks about his the feelings that he has about the oppressed. So Freire was a Brazilian educator. He was creating literacy programs for people that were in low-income areas, poverty-stricken individuals. He believed in the Marxian theory. He was a Marxist. He also believed in solving the illiteracy epidemic. Freire was a big believer that if there was reflection and thought, but there was no action or follow-through, that this was called verbalism. And a lot of the work that he tried to do was to encourage them to use words, give the words meaning and value, called generative words, and use those words to create power for themselves. He definitely linked this teaching philosophy to the philosophy of his life. He went to spend time in impoverished communities before teaching members literacy. He wanted to build a deep connection with them so that they truly understand and understood the importance of being literate and being a part of the process, the political process. All right, so conscientism. Freire empowered illiterate citizens to take back control of the middle and upper ruling classes. He believed that the illiterate citizens did not have any control over voting because they were illiterate, and they did therefore not have a say in what their community and their areas and their towns were doing and voting on. It was mostly controlled by middle and upper ruling classes that were literate. Existential phenomenology, is an emphasis on the experiences of the individual, which is very much what he was focused on, is making it very individualized based. So Freire and the human being, he believed that there needs to be indivisible solidarity between humans and the world. He said, we are not only in the world, but we're with the world. He believed that human actions have more than just physical consequences, and that our human actions actually can change the way that we see the world and what it can be. So the human situation defines that the human creativity should be used to see what the world can be. Humans possess the ability to look at the world for what it is, and that humans create change. He believed in the 3 forms of emerge, reflect, and then intervene. Again, that same idea of not just reflecting, but also acting. Humans don't just adapt to the environment like animals, they create environmental change, so they're on a different level. And their relationship should be, and the changes should be built based on their relationship with the world. He talks about self-creating, which is just that human freedom allows for change and development. History is made and being continuously made by human beings who are using their actions to change and develop the world. So what he says is what it means to be human is to ask what human beings have made of themselves. So he saw that indivisible solidarity between the two. Praxis and dialogue. So it recognizes the relationship between objectivity and subjectivity. So he says objectivity is not just reality, but it's the perspective of the reality. He rejects mechanic objectivism, which is just that it's, the subjective reality. He also believes that our reflection upon material is what creates this intentional version, this intentional perspective, making objectivity actually kind of subjective. So his understanding of praxis is that it must include activism and reflection, not just one or the other. So it has to be both. Reflection and action must occur simultaneously. It leads to creativity and transformation of the world. He believes that humanity is a group action. It has to be carried out by multiple people in a fellowship versus individually. And we shouldn't be acting as observers. We should be transformers of reality. In addition, the understanding of dialogue. So dialogue cannot exist without fellowship and critical thinking. There has to be more than one person. Freier's literacy programs encompass the ideas of dialogue, that his students and teachers were actually working together to learn, and the students were teaching the teachers just as much as the teachers were teaching the students. Therefore, he rejects the banking education, which is where the teacher does all the teaching and the student just adapts and accepts all of the information. He believed this would lead to oppression and dehumanization. So the culture of silence is that really encompasses his Freier's advocacy for liberation and freedom. He believed and he saw through his travels that third world was not just something that was geographical, that it could happen anywhere in any part of the world. He thought of the oppressed people as belonging to this culture of silence. They didn't have a role in society's transformation, a lot of the time because they had no voice, they had no ability to vote. And he also believed that oppressed people were unaware that they had no voice and began to view themselves as other people viewed them, which could be as incompetent or lazy. The dialogue approach just stated that the oppressed people have to be active participants. They have to be problem posing. They have to be ready to confront with their problems. They have to be aware of critical thinking, reflection of the reality, and of course, not just reflection, but also action. He also, just drawing on some of his work, there was 2 main questions that we could pull from it. 1, how can we apply the ideas of rejected authoritarianism and accepting dialogical organization and freedom? Question 2, how can subtle forms of oppression be approached? So those are 2 things that kind of come from his work. Freier addresses some of these applications and approaches to subtle forms of oppression in one of his books called Pedagogy of the City. He has a strong voice in action, research, and critical ethnography. All right, so critical inquiry today. I liked this quote. It says, critical inquiry remains a form of praxis, a search for knowledge to be sure, but always emancipatory knowledge. Knowledge is the context of action and the search of freedom. Critical inquiry today continues to focus on both power and injustice. It challenges others to discard false beliefs, be open-minded, and also create an action plan for change in society. It's very cyclical, it's ongoing, and it's always growing based on reflection and action. The goals of critical inquiry are just society, freedom, and equity among all humans. It is said to be very idealistic, but they also said it's very thought-provoking, and it encourages people to want change in a positive way. The culture mirrors oppression and everyday contradictions in society, so it's a reflection of past generations and thoughts and how those past generations and thoughts are being called into today's culture, and how we are detecting and analyzing things today. Some of the basic assumptions are summarized. It's one, thought is mediated by power and culture. Facts can never be isolated from context. Relationship between concept and object is never stable. Language is central to subjectivity. There is both privileged and oppressed groups in any society. Oppression has many forms, and mainstream research is associated with reproduction of oppression. So in summary, Freire believed that the acknowledgement, reflection, and action were the key steps to transformation. He believed that the oppressed were a third world group, not based geographically. Believed that to be human, you must live as subjects in the world and interact with the world so that you can be part of the changing history. He focused on the ideas of praxis and dialogue to both educate and empower the oppressed. And the critical inquiry aims to expose injustice and create freedom and equity for all. And here's the reference. We did do this based on the karate, but we did chapter 7. Thank you.